Pod and Country is made possible by a grant from the William and Alice Hinckley Fund. I'm Cal Ball, and I'm the director of Pod and Country. Just a few words before we get going. This podcast was started as a response to the very trying and challenging times in which we live today. Huge segments of our population have stopped talking to each other and are consumed with fear and rage. This podcast seeks to start a conversation based on common core values that we believe are held dear by the majority of us, regardless of politics. These values include equal justice, the democratic process, and a basic empathy for humanity. The hope is that we can begin to connect to each other and stand together as we oppose tyranny, cruelty, and other forms of oppression. Now, Pod and Country is designed like a magazine. In fact, we've taken to calling it an audio magazine for the spirit. Each episode has its own unique theme, and within the episode there are different segments, including interviews, music, comedy, and poetry. Each of these segments in some way relate to the episode theme. We hope you enjoy the variety, and would love to hear your feedback. With that, let's get started.
I am the Reverend Vanessa Rush Southern, the senior minister of the First Unitarian Universalist Society of San Francisco. Welcome to Pod and Country. This is a place where we gather to look at UU values, Unitarian Universalists. We are a group of people who are creative, who are hopeful, and who are stubbornly determined to build the worlds we cannot live without, as we dismantle the worlds we cannot live within. I hope you'll join us in these conversations. The light's on. Come on in.
So come on in and grow your spirit, come on in. World of peace with liberty, come on in. Justice starts when all are valued, so let's begin. Now come on in, come on in, come on in. Come on in, come on in, come on in.
Welcome to Pod and Country. I'm Mike.
And I'm Mari.
Actually, I go by Michael because when I'm Mike, people know me as Mike, but then if I'm in trouble, people call me Michael.
Oh, you're in trouble.
I am
You're
in
my
trouble.
partner.
But we'd like to thank you for coming and listening to Pod and Country. This is our second episode. The first episode, we actually got some ratings and reviews, and thank you for those.
Our first review was from Dennis Adams.
Yeah, thank you, Dennis. And we also got some ratings. We got some 5-star ratings, which are great. So if you need to rate the review,
And you need to.
then go down to the bottom of the page. There's little stars. You hit 5 stars, and then that's as easy as that. So if you rate and you review, we may contact you and thank you on the air. So thank you, Dennis Adams.
Thank you, Dennis Adams.
For those of you that didn't listen on the first episode,
Shame on you.
Go back to the first episode and come back.
Go
We'll
back
wait.
and you know, don't come back till you're ready.
Okay, now that
No,
you've
that's
listened
it.
to
Come
the
back.
first
Come
episode,
back. It's
thanks.
a wonderful thing.
You know that the first episode, the theme of the show, and we'll be having a theme for all the different shows, the first theme was tyranny.
Yes, and you know, on each episode of Pod and Country, we talk to a leading thinker whose expertise aligns with the theme of the show. And last week it was tyranny. And Senior Minister Reverend Vanessa Rush Southern had a conversation with the Reverend John Buehrens, who was the past president of the Unitarian Universalist Association and an author of many important books, including Conflagration, How the Transcendentalists Sparked the American Struggle for Racial, Gender, and Social Justice.
I read the book, and I cannot wait for the movie.
Me either, because it was a really good book. And they talked about the theological grounding of the Unitarian opposition to tyranny and oppression. And the conversation was so rich. And with Reverend John being the historian that he is, we decided to extend the conversation into a second part. And in this second part, they talk about the history of the Unitarian response to tyranny and oppression, which in some cases wasn't great. It's very interesting. You'll hear the reverends articulate the fundamental concept of naming evil, which is as relevant today as ever. So that's what we decided to title this podcast, this particular episode. Naming
And we've
evil.
got more in store for you. We've got more fun. We've got sketches. We've got music. We've got poetry. We've got interpretive dance.
Oh, I'm doing it right now.
And to see the interpretive dance on naming evil is a sight to behold. But first, let's begin at the beginning with part 2 of a conversation between
Reverend Vanessa Rush Southern
and Reverend
John Buehrens.
That's right.
Let's listen.
John, welcome back.
Thank you.
It's great to have you back on the podcast. And last time we talked about how, liberals and Unitarian Universalists showed up in the face of tyranny in the United States. And what I would love to get into today is looking at how and where we have been in the battles against fascism and the rise of fascism in Europe.
Okay. Well, here in the United States, there was actually an anti-fascist league that was formed by the Unitarian minister in Kansas City in the 1930s, about the same time that our James Luther Adams, whom we discussed at some length last time, was actually going to Germany. And when you talk about people showing up or not showing up, I'm afraid one of the really sad, tragic stories is the response of the German Unitarians to the rise of Hitler. It was not good. I mean, in some ways, it was a little bit like the tragic story that our own member Bruce Neuberger tells about his liberal Jewish grandparents, who just couldn't believe that good, enlightened, liberal Germans were going to go along with this kind of crude, vulgar demagogue that had taken charge of a whole party and then been appointed chancellor. His book, Postcards to Hitler, is a powerful, personal story of people being kind of blind to the aspects of the rise of fascism. So I don't know the details of the story of the German Unitarians in the 20s and 30s. I don't think anybody's had the guts to write it, but I'm interested in researching it now. All I know is that Hitler, of course, tried to nationalize religion. He formed a Reichskirche, a national church. People like Niemöller saw it happening and began to turn away. They weren't going to join.
Martin Niemöller and Dietrich Bonhoeffer were both German theologians and Lutheran pastors who opposed and organized against the Hitler regime. We'll talk more about them later in the segment.
The so-called confessing church that went underground had people in it like Dietrich Bonhoeffer and others. Adams, after his first stay in Germany in 1934-35, became deeply acquainted with one of the leading intellectuals and Christian socialists, Paul Tillich, and helped to make it possible for Tillich to escape to America. Bonhoeffer, for a while, escaped to America, too, but then felt that he was called to go back. And, actually became part of an active resistance to Hitler, a conspiracy. He was doing an underground seminary, and he ended up being caught and killed.
Well, just to touch base a little bit, because you mentioned Niemöller, and he was, as I understand, he was a Lutheran pastor,
Correct.
And in the 20s and 30s, he actually sympathized, as a lot of people did, with Nazi ideas, and then began to see, especially as they interfered with religious life and church life, began to see through. And Niemöller is most famous, of course, most people probably remember for, first they came for the socialists and I didn't speak out because I wasn't a socialist, and then they came for the trade unionists and I didn't speak out, and of course the last line, and then they came for me and there was no one to speak for me. And I think he's a great example of people who realize after the fact what the price was for not showing up, right? That this wasn't going to go away. That, as my husband likes to say, hope is not a strategy. Faith in the good of human beings or divine power and, human power is not going to do anything if there aren't actually incarnated people doing the work in the world, as we talked about last time. I loved a quote that Bruce, actually, who you referenced, whose family, who wrote postcards
to Hitler.
He shared a quote from Niemöller where Niemöller said something, and I want to just read it because I think it's really interesting. Niemöller later in life said, "We preferred to keep silent. We are certainly not without guilt or fault. And I ask myself again and again, what would have happened if in the year 1933 or 1934, there must have been a possibility. 14,000 Protestant pastors and all Protestant communities in Germany, if they had defended the truth until their deaths. If we had said back then, it's not right when Hermann Göring simply puts 100,000 communists in the concentration camps in order to let them die, I can imagine that perhaps 30 to 40,000 Protestant Christians would have had their heads cut off. But I also can imagine that we would have rescued 30 to 40 million people because that's what it is costing us now."
Wow. It certainly is indicative of the kind of moral atmosphere that Adams went into in Germany. And he wasn't there just as an intellectual, although he was being asked to become a professor of theology and social ethics back here in a Unitarian seminary in Chicago, and felt that he couldn't do it unless he saw where the roots of liberal religion itself, with its emphasis on human freedom, with its emphasis on religion being grounded in the emotions of empathy.
And that this isn't just an idea, right?
Yeah, right.
That this actually has practical commitments that it asks of us, imposes upon us as people of faith.
But Adams picked up on the prophetic, that it was really the biblical tradition with its condemnation of idolatry that was necessary to face down the idolatries of blood and soil that fascism was.
So it's not
lifting
just
up.
the golden calf that they talk about in the Hebrew scriptures, right? That's not just where idolatry begins and ends.
No, idolatry can be focused on almost anything. Our friend Forrest Church used to say that idolatry is the worship of the whole of the part instead of the whole. And you can make a fetish or an addiction or an idolatry out of almost anything that stands in the way and distracts us from the goal of human living, which is love taking the form of justice. Mm-hmm. And when you focus on just the nation, I mean, that's a premature whole. What about the whole of humanity? I mean, we've just sat through the richest man in America being commissioned by the president to throw the USAID operation, people working for humanitarian causes all around the world, into the wood chopper over a weekend. This is an idolatry of nationalism. There's also, just today, as we speak, been a presidential decree about rooting out anti-Christian behavior.
So now we're a theocracy. This nation, one of whose founding principles and commitments was about freedom of religion. Now we are a theocracy.
And it's ironic to me that it is Christianity and Judaism, as it manifests itself among right-wing Jews in Israel, that he's playing favorites with. When in fact the deepest understanding of the whole biblical tradition is anti-idolatry, and that it should never be subjected to this kind of nationalism.
And God is love, right? God is love.
Yeah. And or justice, ever justice, says Moses. Mm-hmm. You can't minimize how important it was for somebody like Adams to come back to the United States and say, this isolationism that people like Charles Lindbergh are lifting up and rallying people around, that kind of nationalism, that's not Christianity, really. It's not religion. It's an idolatry. He, like Reinhold Niebuhr, who had a German heritage to account for, were the key people in saying, we have to be more realistic about this rise of fascism. That's truly dangerous.
Reinhold Niebuhr was an American Reformed theologian, ethicist, commentator, and professor at Union Theological Seminary for more than 30 years. One of America's leading public intellectuals for several decades of the 20th century, he wrote and spoke frequently about the intersection of religion, politics, and public policy.
We may even have to support rearming and being prepared to face it down. And this was in the face of most liberals being pacifists. And more or less appeasement-oriented. I mean, it's another story that we should cop to is the fact that Neville Chamberlain was a Unitarian.
Oh.
British Unitarian Prime Minister of Britain.
The plot sickens, as my mom would say.
Yeah, he goes to Munich and knuckles under to Hitler's demand that the Sudetenland, the German fringe of the Czechoslovak Republic, be turned over immediately, and signs an agreement that well, that's enough. I'll settle for that. And then a year later, of course, he invaded the rest of Czechoslovakia and took it over. But he, like so many liberals in the 1930s, were unwilling to actually name evil when it was right there in front of them. And Adams was part of helping us do that. He probably had his strongest witness in the period after World War II, when it was a matter of doing, as Paul Davies also did, facing down racism, redlining, segregation, McCarthyism, the idolatry that lay behind an expedition like the neocolonialism of the Vietnam War.
Yeah, I was thinking about the idea of passive resistance, right? Passivity is one thing. I think that the lesson about passivity is it rarely works unless you get lucky, and luck is also not a strategy. But passive resistance, I remember hearing about kind of Gandhi and his success in India was that it only works if your opponent has a conscience. And so the question is, who are we resisting and how, and whose attention and whose conscience are we trying to prick so that they will actually reform or change? And it's certainly not going to be some of the people in power.
Right.
They clearly have no conscience, or they wouldn't be doing the things they are. And at this point, it almost feels like part of what we're trying to do is prick the conscience of our fellow citizens, because only in a unified national movement of upheaval can we stem the power grab and the kleptocracy that's being set up right now.
Well, let me say a couple of words about our history in regard to nonviolent resistance. First of all, there is a strand of liberal thought about nonviolence, which is passive. Going all the way back to the 19th century, Aidan Ballou, Universalist who became a Unitarian minister, wrote a book called Christian Non-Resistance. His idea was that if we're going to turn the other cheek, you just never respond to the evil and the violence. You accept it.
Which won't work with bullies, right?
No,
intimate bullies or international bullies.
Correct, and it didn't work during the anti-slavery movement, in the midst of which it was published. People like Theodore Parker, who said, government of the people, by the people, for the people, and talked about the moral arc of the universe bending toward justice. And Frederick Douglass just rejected Aidan Ballou's pacifism. Mm-hmm. The more active form of nonviolent resistance is actually what Dr. King practiced. He had learned from Gandhi that it had to be a strategic an active form of resistance to evil. Both of them.
Well, Gandhi also, both of them used symbolic acts very powerfully.
Absolutely, yeah.
The Salt March,
Exactly.
The Salt March was an act of nonviolent civil disobedience in colonial India led by Mahatma Gandhi. Beginning in mid-March of 1930, he and his followers walked 240 miles to the village of Dandi as a direct action campaign of tax resistance and nonviolent protest against the British salt monopoly.
And King was being very strategic about where he showed up. The Selma campaign, the Memphis campaign where he was assassinated. So I always want to distinguish between the sort of absolute pacifism and the more activist use of nonviolent resistance.
Good correction. I should have said, nonviolent resistance. Yeah.
Yep. There are a lot of things to learn from those campaigns. Evan Wolfson, who is the national director of Freedom to Marry, had deeply studied the civil rights campaign. One of the things I learned out of it was the value of sometimes losing forward, as he put it. Mm. There are occasions when the struggle against injustice has to take a hit deliberately in order to rally sympathy for the cause. But in order to do that, you have to stick your neck out. King didn't expect to win at Selma or in Birmingham. He knew that these were going to be occasions where people like John Lewis be beaten within an inch of their lives. And they were willing to stand there and take the blows and let the entire world see how unjust these things were. During the marriage campaign, we knew we were going to lose some of the state referenda, including the proposition that was on the ballot here in California. But what did we do? We exposed who was behind the resistance to this basic fairness. That it was being done in the name of a certain kind of religion that didn't believe in same-sex equality.
That let families go unprotected.
Exactly. And we had to lose those things in the face of God and everybody in order to build the movement. So, one of the things that I suspect is going to happen here in America as we do a deeper resistance to this latest form of right-wing populism and its fascist aspirations is we're going to lose some battles. And that's not always a bad thing. Mm-hmm. The more outrageous the oppression is, and the better we are at communicating its basic unfairness, its departure from the core values that the bulk of Americans still hold, the better we will do at rallying everybody, including those who have been on the sidelines.
You're making me think about the fact that, from where we started in our discussion of fascism in Europe to the U.S. and the civil rights movement in the current day, that showing up and calling attention to the realities that are realities long before we show up, right? And if you want to take the civil rights as an example, brutality and beatings within an inch of your life had been happening for Black Americans for centuries. I mean, the lynching exhibit is, a perfect example, but there are unfortunately, far too many others. But to show up and have the beating be something that is captured on national TV in a nonviolent protest, puts it in people's faces in a way that puts it in front of their faces and sharpens the picture. And I wonder what that would be for us going forward.
Well, I lived through the Vietnam anti-war movement too. And, I remember the reaction to the 4 students shot at Kent State. I'm not at all in favor of people going out and seeking martyrdom.
Amen.
But I am convinced that, just as the church itself was built on the blood of martyrs, when people are treated so shamefully and even killed or silenced, we have to lift up the voice of the fallen. We have to call attention to the outrage that represents. We have to rally people to the basic empathy that they're still capable of, and to just see that this cannot be allowed to stand. Mm. Our sisters and brothers in the Hungarian-speaking lands of Eastern Europe went through not only fascism, but then the left-wing totalitarianism of communism, the bloody dictatorship of Ceausescu in Romania, who tried to just eliminate all of those ancient Unitarian Hungarian-speaking villages and plow them over and build up socialist, housing projects where they'd all be moved to. It's a little bit like Trump trying to move everybody out of the rubble of Gaza so he can put in a beach resort. It's just despicable. Mm. But a couple of the Unitarian ministers, Judith Gellert's father, Balázs Ferenc, after whom the scholarship for Transylvanian Unitarian ministers at Star King is named. They were martyred. They were killed. They're remembered. The fact that they were remembered through that whole period is what kept that church alive and resistant through more years of oppression and totalitarianism. Those poor people were a triple minority. They were religious people in a secular communist state. They were Hungarian-speaking in Romania. And they were heretics in the eyes of most of the mainline Christians who were Catholic, Lutheran, and Reformed. The fact that our sisters and brothers survived in that part of the world, and
they're cooperating with fascism, and it's
they are having trouble remembering their own history. Mm-hmm. And they, all too many of them, I think, see Viktor Orban as protecting the family and protecting the Hungarian ethnic traditions that they hold dear.
While throwing your gay, lesbian, transgender, bisexual siblings under the bus.
Yeah, but, I'm afraid that rather cosmopolitan concept is a little hard for these people in rural villages in Romania to really wrap their head around.
I'm just as an aside, I find myself thinking one of our colleagues who you served with in New York and who was one of my ministers along with you growing up was Forest Church. And he said, I remember from childhood, and it stuck with me, choose your enemies carefully, for you shall become like them.
Exactly.
That, to me, is a really interesting thing to keep in mind for all of us, and maybe for us, too, as liberals to sit with about how we engage in something that is so heartbreaking. There's so much betrayal in what's happening now of values and institutions that we have been fundamental in building up because they serve values and commitments that we find sacred.
Right.
And watching them get destroyed, and for no good reason, it appears to us. I wonder what it means like to keep centered spiritually in this time, right? Choose your enemies carefully, for you shall become like them. What does it mean to be engaged in the work of this time and of resistance, and not repeat the ills that our enemies have repeated, right?
Yeah. So the love of God and human love are, I think, spiritually and theologically often confusing to people. I've been reading a book called Will and Spirit by Gerald May, in which he says that there are 3 personality types in response to the encounter with disappointment. The disappointment that some people's love is so finite and conditional. I can only love, people like me. One is to just get all sentimental yourself and try to fill the lack of love with your own emotional infusions, which is frankly something of a setup for hysterical behavior and more disappointment. Then there are those of us who are real good doobies who try to earn love, finding that it's conditional, and we're real strivers, and we are learned to be a little bit obsessive about earning good regard. And then there's this third form, which we're seeing in our current president, which is quite pathological and says, you're not going to love me? To hell with you. I'm only going to pay attention to people who revere and love me unconditionally. And it's sad for us to discover how many people take that kind of very narcissistic and almost psychopathic approach to conditional love because of their own traumas. But more and more, I've had to force myself to try to imagine what it is in the story of all of the people who vote for this man. The neglect. The stories that go beyond Vance's hillbilly elegy stories and things like that. That there has been a tremendous neglect by more privileged liberals of ordinary working class people in the middle of the country. There's no question about it economically. There's been more focus on people who are really at the margins and we've taken some folks for granted. So I think it's important for us to have some empathy for the deluded. It's hard.
So can you say more about that?
Reinhold Niebuhr said that evil is always the failure of imagination to include enough reality. And I think there are ways in which liberals have sometimes left out people. But just today we've got people doing things like shredding USAID, which is the soft power of America. It's the network of humanitarian aid that prevents people from giving up on their own country and becoming homeless migrants knocking on our doors.
And it takes our abundance, the farmers, the backbone
Absolutely.
of our nation, and helps them stay afloat to help people be fed in faraway nations. I mean, it's a beautiful program in many ways.
It takes a God's eye perspective to see the whole. Mm-hmm. And we human beings are finite, as I said earlier. And we better not expect that we're any of us going to be able to see the whole of reality in a way that is going to make for justice like that. It's not the immaculate conception of the good that we're after. We're after the back and forth of two steps toward justice and progress and human unity. And we have to accept that there's always going to be a reaction, one step backwards. We're in the middle of one of the nastiest reactions, because it's empowered by so many new technologies that divide and distract us.
And isolate us. I would say
Correct.
That's another delusion that has been reinforced by technology, by people moving away from things like the Rotary Club and bowling leagues, as Robert
Absolutely.
Putnam talked about decades ago in Bowling Alone, is that people are more and more isolated.
Yeah.
And instead of being connected in intimate, in families, in institutions, in community gatherings, where you learn that not only are you not alone, but what it means to care about other people whose life experiences and needs are different than yours, and that they are you and you are they, right?
The people who sat on the sidelines in the last election, who were far too numerous, are victims of the American delusion that the ultimate goal of human existence is autonomy. Just being for myself. Well, excuse me. We're in this together. And if we don't see that, if we don't rebuild the networks of human empathy and community, we cannot create the kind of future that we want to have.
We won't survive. It's despairing,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
It won't work. It's despairing. It's not fun.
Yeah.
And it's not how we were made, right? We are social creatures.
No.
We're made to be in
We
community.
were made
and
for one
connected.
another. We were made for joy.
Right. Absolutely.
We were made for joy. And, we have to maintain that sort of countercultural.
Yeah, be maladjusted, as King would say.
Yeah.
Right? Mm-hmm.
And even in this, in what seemed to be hours of despair, what religious people need to do, particularly, is praise the gift of life. Be glad that we're being tested. Reach deep to have that empathy for one another and to be in the struggle.
Right.
Because this struggle is what matters. It's what will shape the lives of our children and our children's children.
And the things that are broken will be revealed, and rebirth and resurrection will be possible of the things that matter.
Amen.
Yeah.
I think we should leave it at that.
Sounds
Vanessa.
good. Sounds good. Thank you again, John. Amen and amen.
And now, a word from our sponsors.
This is Rosita Socorro Man, your man on the streets. And we're here at the corner of Walk and Don't Walk, taking the pulse of the average American. Excuse me, sir, can I ask you a question?
What?
I'd like to ask you a few questions.
What do I look like, a magic 8-ball?
Oh, it's what I do. I'm man on the street. I like to ask people their name and what they do.
Oh, you like to get to know people. How nice. Well, in that case, I'm Edwin, and I teach sarcasm as a second language at City College.
You look familiar.
I'm famous. I was voted the angriest man in America at the 6th annual Alex Jones Invitational.
Ah, yes. You had some stiff competition this year. What do you think gave you the edge?
Are you kidding me? All I had to do was look at my phone.
So your phone makes you angry?
Yeah, it's my phone. My phone makes me angry. No, it's not my phone. It's the news on my phone. I look at the news and I'm angry. I don't look at the news and then I'm worried and then I get angry about that. I'm angry because I'm powerless to do anything but be angry. Oh, that makes my blood boil.
Maybe you need a new phone.
Is that a feeble attempt at sarcasm?
Not at all. I leave sarcasm to the professionals. Still, it can't be easy to hold that much anger.
You're right. Who needs anger? Maybe I'll go to church. Yeah, that's what the world needs. More candles, casseroles, and kumbaya.
Wow, you are good at this.
Thank you. 10,000 hours and all that.
Speaking of churches, you ever heard of the Unitarian Universalist Church?
No.
They actually do things that matter.
But there's no room for anger in a place like that, and that only makes me angrier.
What are you talking about? Unitarian Universalists have been pissed off for a long time. They helped with abolition, women's suffrage, gay marriage, and now they're fired up about climate change, democracy, and immigrant rights.
So, Unitarian Universalist. Well, how come I never heard of them? Don't tell me bad marketing.
Or maybe it's because you're so approachable. A regular Mr. Rogers.
Touché. You catch on quick, kid.
Thanks.
So you're telling me I can do something useful by putting my phone down and showing up at a UU church?
Exactly.
That makes me so mad.
Why does that make you mad?
Why didn't somebody tell me sooner?
Ay, ay, ay.
When I think of protest music, I drift back to the days of the 60s Newport Folk Festival. Lots of earnest teens with short hair, button-down shirts, chain smoking, and swaying to the out-of-tune strum of a guitar with a melody borrowed from a traditional sea shanty. In truth, folk music has seen many forms, from Barry Maguire's Eve of Destruction to the guitar-driven Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young's Ohio, to the Sex Pistols' God Save the Queen. And if you're looking for something current, check out how hip-hop has taken over the mantle of protest. Give a listen to Public Enemy's Fight the Power. You know, Elvis was a hero to most. Boy, what I wouldn't give for a royalty budget so I could play you the whole song. Well, in this musical installment, we offer what the kids call a banger, a rocker with a lyric that speaks to our theme, naming evil. Recently, Cal had the opportunity to speak with the singer-songwriter Baxter Robertson.
So we have Baxter with us today, and very fortunate that we have an opportunity to just chat. Now, full disclosure, I have known Baxter since, I think you told me, 1991. Is that correct?
That's correct.
That's correct. Okay. So a long time. And 40 years later, we are still speaking to each other, which is remarkable because neither one of us is that nice of a person.
And we're still collaborating on music.
And we are. That gets to the first question that I had down for the song that we've selected for the podcast. So the song is called Circus Maximus. Just a quick history note. The Circus Maximus is an ancient Roman Colosseum and mass entertainment venue in Rome, Italy, in use from approximately 600 BCE until 600 AD. Although the Circus Maximus was designed for chariot racing, other events were held there, including gladiatorial combats to the death and wild animal hunts. Tell folks just at a high level,
what's going on with that?
What's going on with these?
Well,
lyrics?
I mean, I think let's go back to me being under the gun to write a whole bunch of songs for an album and coming up with this idea of a fictional band called the Family Pets, which became a band because I gathered the musicians and they all understood what was going on with this. And so I came up with, what is bigger than big? I mean, what's a really bloated concept for an overarching, like an album, And I thought, well, Circus Maximus, that popped into my head as being that thing. And so having the title in mind, then I began to kind of contemplate about, the nature of man and, the usual man's inhumanity to man and all that stuff. And then I somehow got on the idea of what if this were being looked upon by and a more advanced race who could see literally the passage of time on Earth as, almost a blink of an eye or something like that. So it's to have something like all this, have, like a Roman Colosseum with all the kind of attendant, ugliness and horror and all that stuff, and how man is, because I mentioned nuclear toys and so forth, how man is today, how nothing much has changes in a lot of ways. And then that helped me set upon writing the inner lyrics to it.
So we think about the metaphor. Here's Circus Maximus. Our theme today, for this episode rather, is naming evil. It's hard to conjure more evil than that which would happen inside of that Colosseum, and the motivations that drove the emperors to actually put on these games, which were nothing less than well beyond cruelty and well into horror. So that metaphor, got it. It's the extended metaphor that really works for me, which is not only is this happening in this period of time in Western civilization history, you have the sense that, no, this has been going on since 2001: A Space Odyssey, and the bone goes down on the other bone, from the apes, and that was it.
And all the way up through today.
Right. And that's what's remarkable, and that's why we chose it.
And I think that one of the reasons that I hit upon seeing this from like the eyes of, somebody not of this world, a more advanced race, what actually helps soften the whole thing, because if you actually get down into the horror and write all those lyrics about like what's going on and about the wrong that's being done, I mean, it's very sanctimonious and heavy-handed. But when I applied the fact that it was like these aliens going, boy, you people are clueless, and then at the end, the protagonist, presumably somebody on Earth, is going, we didn't think anybody was watching, but they were, right? So that's I think helped me understand that I was softening the whole concept and having a little bit more fun. Obviously, it's not that much fun, but it's,
Well, for me, it's that last line, and yes, a spoiler alert, there's the last line of the song, which is, we never thought anybody was watching. In my interpretation, it wasn't softening so much as it was almost a little shocking. It said, oh my God, this has been, someone else is watching this and watching what we are doing. And so I took away that it was a cautionary tale at the end of the day.
Well, that's what it ends up. Yeah. That's how it wraps up.
Like,
being. I was lucky in that sense. With lyrics and songs,
lucky.
Sometimes you get really lucky. And when I finished most of this record,